With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. I am Sabrina Halvorson here with Lorrie Boyer. Good morning.
Good morning.
We're jumping right out the gate today. We're going to talk about tariffs. So, as we know, over the weekend, the president confirmed the tariffs. They're set to take place actually today, Tuesday being the effective date. Now, we did get word yesterday that there was an agreement reached with Mexico of a delay of 1 month for these new tariffs. So those tariffs won't actually start for Mexico until the beginning of March, but still relevant discussion. And so we wanted to just give some responses from around the ag community and others and take a look at what these tariffs could mean. So, of course, what we're talking about are the 25% tariffs for Canada and Mexico, which previously did not have tariffs because of a trade deal that was negotiated during President Trump's first term in office, the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. That has been in place since the president's first administration, but now he is going back and changing things by imposing tariffs that kind of go against that trade deal, but putting that 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico. And then China, who already had tariffs, he is adding an additional 10%. So it is causing some, a bit of a shakeup in the ag community. And we have some responses that we wanted to go through. And the first one, Lori, that I'm going to play is a colleague and friend of ours, both of ours, Susan Littlefield, who is a farm broadcaster from Nebraska. She did an interview that I wanted to just play a piece of, and this is Josh Linville. And he is an expert in the fertilizer market. And so he's talking a little bit about what this could mean for our growers, especially more Midwestern growers who are going to be getting into their planting time. And I'll just play a little bit of that.
And frankly, in the fertilizer world, it comes down to the product. When we look at urea, there's a tremendous amount of urea that flows from the U.S. to Canada in the eastern half of the country. In the western half of the country, Canada sends a lot of urea down to the Pacific Northwest, California regions. So there's a shared flow there. You flip over to anhydrous. There's a lot of anhydrous that comes from Canada down into the U.S. We're highly reliant on that. A lot of phosphate comes from the U.S. to Canada. They're dependent on us there. And then potash is the biggest one. It's hard to understate just how important Canadian potash flows are to the U.S. And so when we look at all of these things, I would tell you the thing that has me believing we're actually going to pay a little bit more of this tariff rate in the short term is because of the calendar. Like you said, it's February 1st. There's not a lot of time before we start pre-plant application. I mean, we are now 30 days away from the month of March when theoretically we could be in the field applying, putting on anhydrous, things like that. That simply doesn't give us enough time to say, oh, okay, if they're going to force us to pay the 25%, we'll just go buy from somewhere else around the world. It takes 30 days to get a vessel from the Middle East. It takes 30 days to get vessels from most anywhere around the world to arrive at our shores, and then another 3 to 4 weeks just to get that product in place and available to the farmer. So unfortunately, the timing of this could not be worse. We're out of options. And so we're already starting to see this with some of the conversations, with some of the new contract verbiage. The tariff onus is really being put on the U.S. buyer if it were to happen. Longer term, a little bit different situation, but for spring, this is kind of the way it's setting up.
So that again from an expert in the fertilizer market. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to play that entire interview for you, our listeners, later on in the show. So you will get to hear all of his comments. But Lori, I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think he has very valid points. The timing of this is very interesting. Although I agree that, or I guess I agree. I mean, you don't have much choice, so I shouldn't even say that. But although I agree with Trump getting after it sooner than later, because it would be even harder a little bit later on here. Although I agree with that, it is such a shaky time when it comes to the fertilizer industry. With regard to other industries, with regard to the rest of ag, I'm not sure that it is a bad time, because now that we have spring upon us and we are starting to really pick up talks on other farm policy where we left off before the Biden administration ended, i.e. the Farm Bill, I think it's actually good timing to get in line with what may or may not happen with the Farm Bill, with what may or may not happen with an upcoming ag budget and all the different programs that are involved in that. So for that, in my opinion, it's actually good timing before all those things. But yeah, when it comes to fertilizer markets, we already have other geopolitical events that have been shaking that up. The Ukraine and Russia war is my main example there. That has gone under the radar just a little bit, I think, lately with all the administration announcements that have come in. But there continues to be a legitimate war. There continues to be firing and bombing of infrastructure. And we get a lot of our potash reserves. We get a lot of fertilizer from those areas. So yeah, that's very daunting for the fertilizer industry with that going on in general. And now the talks of tariffs on top of that.
Yeah. And we do have more comments and responses, reaction from other ag leaders that we will get to. We're going to take a break before we get into those, but we will have some other comments from like the American Farm Bureau Federation, National Farmers Union, people like them when we get back. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She is Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. We are talking about tariffs that the president has put on Canada, Mexico, and then additional tariffs from China. And so we have some responses here. And I will start with the National Farmers Union. And their president, Rob LaRue, issued a statement. He issued this back on Friday. And he said that the trade actions announced by the president will almost certainly trigger significant retaliation against U.S. agricultural products. This comes at a time of deep uncertainty for farmers. Commodity prices are volatile, input costs remain high, and we still lack an updated farm bill. This again from National Farmers Union President Rob LaRue. He goes on to say, one thing is clear, American family farmers and ranchers are always the first to bear the brunt of unilateral trade actions. He says, while we support efforts to hold trading partners accountable and strengthen American manufacturing, our members have already suffered heavy losses from past trade disputes, especially with China, and have lost valuable market access. Once again, that from NFU President Rob LaRue.
I have one here today, and I actually did see, I can throw this in here at some point, not necessarily reaction to that announcement, but reaction from Canada on what they're going to retaliate with on some of the items there. I think there was a little bit of question earlier on what all they were talking about. Now we have a better scope of that. But from Western Growers here, Casey Creamer, he is the executive director of the, or excuse me, wrong person, Western Growers president and CEO, Dave Puglia, excuse me on that. He says Canada and Mexico are the first and second largest importers of U.S. grown fresh produce. China, another significant fresh produce importer, is a number 2 importer of American tree nuts. So he's pointing out why this is important. He says imposition of tariffs with our key trading partners in this manner and at these levels will almost certainly result in retaliatory tariffs that harm American growers. He says now why they appreciate border security issues motivating the Trump administration, and while he recognizes how important it is to work on them, he's also a little worried, and I'm totally paraphrasing here, a little worried about rival growers of specialty crops in other countries and the opportunities that those rivals will get because of our tariff announcement.
Valid point. Absolutely valid point, because a lot of the crops that we grow in California, when we export them, we're not the only option. They don't have to buy from us. And so putting us into a trade war like this could mean that they're going to be buying from other nations. And that would be, very harmful for our California farmers.
Yeah, exactly. I'll take this opportunity to throw this one in. U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, she's a Democrat from Minnesota, but is the ranking member of the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. She says these tariffs will only make it harder for American families to put food on a table and for American farmers and ranchers to sell their products. They will also raise gas prices by as much as 50 cents a gallon, car prices by up to $3,000, and key inputs like potash fertilizer, which you and I just talked about, by up to $25 a ton. Farmers and ranchers want an even playing field, not handouts necessitated by another Trump trade war. She says she does support targeted tariffs to combat cheating by countries like China, but these haphazard tariffs will set our country back. So
Yeah.
that's what she had to say.
Interesting. I do have a statement in support, and this is from House Agriculture Committee Chairman, House Agriculture Committee Chairman Glenn G.T. Thompson. And he says, this is a quote from him. I'm reading directly from his statement. President Trump's tariff policies have been an effective tool in leveling the global playing field and ensuring free trade for American producers. Look no further than Colombia's about face on accepting criminal migrants at the mere threat of tariffs. He says after 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration's failure to expand foreign markets, which led to an inflated agricultural trade deficit of $45.5 billion. American producers deserve an administration that will fight for them. I look forward to working alongside President Trump to support hardworking producers and to make agriculture great again. That again from House Agriculture Committee Chairman Glenn G.T. Thompson, a Republican from Pennsylvania. So he's kind of falling right there along the party lines in support of President Trump's tariffs, which I don't know. I want to say I'm surprised by it because there have been so many experts saying these are going to be bad for agriculture. But again, he's falling in line with the party. So that not necessarily surprising.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Same kind of scenario on Klobuchar as well. Doesn't
Right.
surprise me at all. Her statement would say that, especially because she served in the last administration. So, well, also
Right.
T. Thompson, they both did. So
They
yeah,
both did,
neither
right.
one of those surprised me at all.
And that's the interesting thing. And, we only have a few 30 seconds before we have to go to another break. But interesting thing about politics and falling along the party lines, doesn't it? I don't know. It seems like we can make so much more progress as a nation if instead of following parties, we were to just look at what would actually be the most beneficial.
Exactly.
And maybe I shouldn't say that as a journalist, but I do try to remain nonpartisan. But yeah, it seems like we're getting more and more of that breakup between the two parties.
Yeah, but you are remaining nonpartisan because it's about getting the work done and what people need, not party lines.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So along those lines, we are going to take another quick break. We'll be back with a couple more reactions to the tariffs and looking at what this could continue to mean for agriculture in California and also around the nation. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She is Lorrie Boyer, and we will be right back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
We're chatting this morning about the tariffs that President Trump has put on Mexico and Canada and also on China. And you have some reactions from Canada and Mexico, Lorrie. Why don't you tell us about that?
All right, let me start with Mexico because it is just a little shorter, I guess, if you will. So even before the inauguration, I think you and I even mentioned that briefly here on the show that the Mexican president and her name, let me get you her name here. I just had it up and then I went away.
Claudia.
Claudia
Yeah.
Sheinbaum, I believe is her name. Yeah, President Claudia Sheinbaum. She actually attended the inauguration. They had some pre-discussions on this. So I do not think that this surprised her. I believe she knew this was going to happen and she still went to the inauguration. It does feel like, and I'm reading in between the lines a little bit here, that she's actually not completely hating on President Trump for this right now. So she has accepted his tariffs in to some extent, but said that she really wants to get a discussion going as soon as possible so that this is a short-term tariff situation. And she is ready to negotiate a resolution as soon as possible. So I think that's actually some optimistic news that are coming out from Mexico. So maybe these tariffs will be a little bit more short-lived, at least on the Mexico side of things. As for Canada, they have started to release their list of retaliatory tariffs. Now, while I didn't hear a lot about Mexico in my market report retaliating, Canada is. And so $30 billion, I'm just going to read through this list. And I know we can't get too far into the weeds on this. Plus, I'm sure this is going to be changing here every few days. So who knows what we'll be talking about in the next few days. But so far, this is what they have included: poultry, pork, dairy, wheat, barley, rye, oats, rice, sunflowers, canola, sugar products, chocolates, pasta, fruits, vegetables, soups, wine, beer, distilled liquors, tobacco, and wood products. Also included are animal feed supplements and harvesting equipment. While this list did not include beef and soybeans, other exports and small volumes of commodities that could additionally be added, potentially beef and soybeans. But that is interesting that those weren't included. But those are just some of the things. There is a lot more here, but I just wanted to give that overview of what Canada is coming back at us with.
So those tariffs, or their retaliatory tariffs,
Yes.
are the reason those are important is because that also could raise prices for everybody,
Yes, all
basically.
of those
Right.
goods, because the importers will not be able to absorb the additional cost. So yeah, it will most likely be passed on to consumers. I also might mention here that Canada has also listed energy and energy products on this list, but instead of the 25% retaliatory, it'll be 10% on all.
Interesting.
Yeah,
How much of our energy comes from Canada?
that's a
And
good
why have
question.
I never thought about that before?
I haven't either, but I actually misstated that. I'm sorry.
It's
That
okay.
is not a energy. Let me be clear. Energy was not a retaliatory tariff. It was a tariff that the president placed on Canada, but not at the 25% level, at the 10% level.
So that's a tariff we're putting on them,
Yes, thank you.
not the other way. So we send them energy.
Yes. Well, no, they still send us energy, but now the president is saying you get a 10% tariff. So that will make our gas prices most likely go up.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I
So
hope I said that right. Yeah.
yeah, you know what? I'm going to stick to radio broadcasting, not politics, because this is confusing.
It is confusing, and I I kind of lumped that in where I shouldn't have. So
No.
that was against them. The energy
Yeah.
10% against Canada.
So what's going to be interesting, I think, in this, just for listeners, not necessarily just for farmers, farmers are probably going to be seeing input costs rise. And we're going to see, I would think, exports to these countries go down because our prices, what consumers are paying for our products in Mexico and in Canada, those prices are going to go up. So when Canadian shoppers are choosing their groceries and they see the products from the US are now a higher price than the products from Canada, they're going to choose their products from Canada. So that then will lead to us selling them less because they need less of our products because they're not selling as much. Therefore, our agricultural products are going to drop in exports. And so that's one of the reasons why the ag community is responding the way that it is. That on top of these retaliatory tariffs are going to make things cost more here. So our grocery prices for regular, just for everybody, but then if you have a farm business, other inputs, like we were talking about, the fertilizers and things like that, those prices are going to go up too. So now you're selling less and it's costing you more to do business. So these are the reasons why agriculture is concerned. And that's kind of in a nutshell, the whole idea of why this is so important to US ag. Because, while for all consumers, it's going to raise all of our prices. However, most of us will continue to do business the same way in many ways. Obviously, there are other industries that will be affected as well. But with our
Yes.
focus on ag, when we're looking at this, it's kind of a double hit for ag.
Yes, exactly. I think you nailed it. All of that. Yeah.
All right. Well, so I need a break now. So we're going to take a quick break and then we'll come back. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lori Boyer. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are chatting about tariffs this morning, and I do have another comment that I wanted to read. This is from the American Farm Bureau President, Zippy Duvall, who expressed alarm, it says in this statement, about potential harm to farmers resulting from the order signed by President Trump. Farm Bureau members, he says, support the goals of security and ensuring fair trade with our North American neighbors and China. But unfortunately, we know from experience that farmers and rural communities will bear the brunt of retaliation. Harmful effects of retaliation to farmers ripple through the rest of the rural economy. Duvall goes on to say, in addition, more than 80% of the U.S. supply of key fertilizer ingredient, potash, comes from Canada. Tariffs that increase fertilizer prices threaten to deliver another blow to the finances of farm families already grappling with inflation and high supply costs. So this again from American Farm Bureau President Zippy Duvall. I just want to finish reading here. It says in his statement, the uncertainty hits just as operating loans are being secured and spring planting approaches, leaving farmers in a tough spot. He says, we look forward to working with President Trump to position our farmers for success while also ensuring American strength and leadership on the international stage. So, uh, he does talk a bit in his statement about the importance of Canada and Mexico. He says more than 20% of U.S. farm income comes from these exports, which are dominated through three markets: Mexico, Canada, China. So it's these tariffs they're a big deal. They really are.
The National Cattlemen's Beef Association has come out with their statement as well. The president-elect, Buck Werbine, and he is from Nebraska. He is talking about, I'm just going to paraphrase it a little bit here today. His point is that, we shouldn't be surprised. President Trump is a negotiator, and he's been pretty vocal about what he said he's going to do. So that's part of what he said. The other thing is, he says he doesn't particularly believe in tariffs just across the board. However, he does believe in them with bad actors, which China is a big customer of ours, but they can be kind of abusive, he said. And he went on to say he's okay with tariffs if you pick and choose them. Yeah, I see what he's saying. He's like, don't come in and just blanket tariff everything. Let's be strategic about those tariffs. Kind of in a similar to fashion, I guess, if you will, if I compare that to when we talked about deportation, mass deportation versus targeting, the nefarious people that are not doing good things in a country. It's kind of that same thing. But I just can't imagine how much extra time that would take to really vet and pinpoint all that down. It would take so much extra time for Trump to be able to do what he's doing here. I just think that hopefully we can be on that same page as the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, and see this short-lived. Get the message. Let's get the negotiation process going. Let's get things back on track. And hopefully we won't have a long-term effect from the tariffs, because as you and I both know, especially when we even talked about supply chains and issues with our ports, once things start progressing, it is hard to bounce back. It is hard to get that chain back to where it needs to be. And as we're seeing some of the fallout from the last time President Trump was in office and issued those tariffs, there's a little bit of PTSD, if you will, among groups, as you just read from AFBF.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're absolutely right. Because, our ag groups do remember the last time we had, I mean, it's only been 4 years. And,
Right.
we remember what happened the last time. And, and also like one of the statements that you read, and I forget now who it was from, but, saying that, I mean, and maybe it was from Klobuchar, but, you know, farmers don't want the handout. I mean,
That
it
was
was nice that they got the financial compensation last time to make up for a little bit of what the tariffs cost them, but farmers would rather just be doing business.
exactly. And that was from her. I might also add here from a market report, some analysts that I got here kind of going along with our optimism for a shorter than longer period of tariffs. Goldman Sachs analyst believes that this spat will be short-lived, saying neither Mexico nor Canada can really afford for it to go on. So while we are talking about our effects on our country's farmers, their country's farmers and industries are also jeopardized by this. And so hopefully those leaders are going to kick it into gear and be like, well, we can't afford for this to keep going on to our people. So there is some hope in that as well.
Yeah, that's a great point because, yeah, you're right. And you know what? We are very US focused. And, but it's not just us that this is affecting. This is going to be affecting the farmers in Canada and the farmers in Mexico. And I suppose in China as well. So they all have as much a stake in this as we do.
Yeah. And let us also point out, too, that the Chinese president and Trump were having some discussions before his inauguration, and he, too, attended the inauguration. And maybe I read more into that than there is. But I guess if you're going to attend an inauguration and be there to support, I would assume support. Maybe I'm totally wrong on this because I'm just making assumptions at this point. That you're supporting the inauguration or being a part of it tells me, that at least they're engaged and at least they're, hopefully having some sort of relationship. So even with China, a part of the other China thing though is they were supposed to have put in place the phase one trade deal that Trump negotiated before he left office. Of course, when the Biden administration came along, politics or otherwise, there's a lot of arguments on that. They let it go. They never pursued it. They never enforced it. So now Trump's coming back and saying, maybe we should pick up on this. The phase one deal, if you recall, would require China to increase their purchasing pace from the United States by 33%, which actually was part of an original trade deal. And Trump was set out to enforce that. So now that topic is kind of coming back up right now on, wait a minute, okay, they already had a trade deal in place. They need to get to work on that as well. So you kind of got a twofold situation going on there.
Yeah, you know what? You are right. I had forgotten about that, and I think maybe I'm not the only one who had forgotten about that. But you're right. There was that trade deal put into place under the first Trump administration with China that China did not follow. They did not do their part for what they were supposed to do. And they weren't really held to that in the Biden administration. Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And yes, and so some of that now is with the new Trump administration coming in to make them do what they were supposed to do the first time around. So we do have to take another break, but we will be back in just a moment. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back. Welcome back again. We are talking about the tariffs and trade this morning. And so we've just been giving some reactions from the agricultural community and a couple of lawmakers as well. So, there's been quite a bit to discuss. We've had quite a bit of reactions. Farmers a lot of our ag industry reactions are not in support of these additional tariffs, even with some understanding that tariffs are a good negotiating tool. They work in many cases. However, in this case, our farmers are really going to take the brunt of this.
Yeah. Can I also mention this in here because I think it's important to at least slide this in at some point because this is another major development that's occurring in tandem with this tariff discussion. There has been an agreement reached between USDA's APHIS and the country of Mexico to resume imports of cattle. You and I talked about the New World screwworm situation a few days ago or a couple of weeks ago. It seems like yesterday. But anyway, a new protocol has been in place and that trade is allowed to resume there. So good, bad, or otherwise, that's also going on at the same time as all the tariff discussion.
Yes, and that is something also to really keep an eye on because that new world screwworm situation can be a big problem if it were to get here into our cattle producers. So I'm glad that APHIS is on top of it and taking it as seriously as it needs to be.
Yeah. But and even though it's not directly tied to our tariff discussion, it kind of is because it is a trade thing. They were able to reach an agreement. US and Mexico were able to reach an agreement. The protocol is acceptable to both sides. The cattle groups seem to be okay with it. So relating it back to our tariff discussion, there is hope. There is hope. Mexico and US are working together on this issue. So maybe it can expand into some of the other tariff discussions that we're talking about.
Yeah. All right. Well, we need to take another break, but then when we come back, we have an interview from a colleague and good friend of ours, Susan Littlefield, who's a farm broadcaster from Nebraska, and she is talking with Josh Linville, who is a fertilizer market expert from StoneX. So we will come back from the break with Susan Littlefield. Welcome back. Here is Susan Littlefield.
So let's talk kicking it off with I think the biggest thing that has been on the minds, especially with the producers that I've been talking about, is they're watching what happens with tariff talks, with February 1st looming on Saturday. But there's just a lot of things looking at what you're seeing in this nitrogen, in this fertilizer market in general. What are some things that you're looking towards?
Yeah, and it's a lot of theoretical type stuff. I know a lot of people have been asking, what do you think this does for prices? What is this and what's that? And there's a lot of different viewpoints of who actually pays the tariff. And I think a lot of that comes back to pressure and timing, the ability to shift supplies. And frankly, in the fertilizer world, it comes down to the product. When we look at urea, there's a tremendous amount of urea that flows from the U.S. to Canada in the eastern half of the country. In the western half of the country, Canada sends a lot of urea down to the Pacific Northwest, California regions. So there's a shared flow there. You flip over to anhydrous. There's a lot of anhydrous that comes from Canada down into the U.S. We're highly reliant on that. A lot of phosphate comes from the U.S. to Canada. They're dependent on us there. And then potash is the biggest one. It's hard to understate just how important Canadian potash flows are to the U.S. And so when we look at all of these things, I would tell you the thing that has me believing we're actually going to pay a little bit more of this tariff rate in the short term is because of the calendar. Like you said, it's February 1st. There's not a lot of time before we start pre-plant application. I mean, we are now 30 days away from the month of March when theoretically we could be in the field applying, putting on anhydrous, things like that. That simply doesn't give us enough time to say, oh, okay, if they're going to force us to pay the 25%, we'll just go buy from somewhere else around the world. It takes 30 days to get a vessel from the Middle East. It takes 30 days to get vessels from most anywhere around the world to arrive at our shores, and then another 3 to 4 weeks just to get that product in place and available to the farmer. So, unfortunately, the timing of this could not be worse. We're out of options. And so we're already starting to see this with some of the conversations, with some of the new contract verbiage. The tariff onus is really being put on the U.S. buyer if it were to happen. Longer term, a little bit different situation, but for spring, this is kind of the way it's setting up.
So let's look at nitrogen to start out with. And, it was funny because yesterday, as I was driving back from an event, I saw somebody out in the field working and dragging behind them a nitrogen tank. Where are we sitting? Good supply issues? Are we okay at this point, or is it just going to continue to tighten?
I think it's going to continue to tighten, but this is not a tariff situation. This is something we've been talking about in here for several months. Globally speaking, there are a lot of nitrogen supply issues. When you look at urea, for the bulk of the fertilizer year, European production has been 75% of normal because of the gas situation, the lack of gas supplies coming from Russia. That 25% represents 3.5 million tons of urea missing, 2 million tons of UAN missing, millions of anhydrous tons missing. Chinese urea exports. We got their December trade data. They would typically export 5 to 5.5 million tons of urea in a given year, calendar year. Last year, January through December, 266,000. That's 5 million ton missing. And then we've got Iranian production offline because of gas supply issues. They exported 4.8 million ton last year. So we are in a very, very tight situation. And now the market is finally starting to step up and realize that because demand's starting to step up for the spring seasons. We've seen urea prices shooting up about $80 a ton over the last few weeks. And so that's just a global perspective. That doesn't include the fact that we are actively raising demand with our corn acres. We started in here 92 million acres at the start of the year. Before we left on our vacation, Mike and Quan came to me and said, hey, we want to move to 92 and a half. Fully understood. The corn prices were showing it. A lot of the conversation were showing it. We moved it. I wasn't gone a week. Arlen moved his number to 93 and a half. And the scary thing is there are some in the market saying, look at the corn soybean ratio. Look at some of the reports from some seed companies and different things like that. 95 to 96 million is in the market. You think about the fact that every single one of those additional corn acres carries with it additional nitrogen demand. And again, look at that calendar. February 1. We send the vessel, it arrives March 1. By the time it's available to the farmer, it's April 1. We feel like we've got all the time in the world. From a fertilizer global transportation perspective, we're almost out of time.
Very well put. And, you talk about those acres, and if we start to see the corn versus bean acres, and if it's more corn acres coming in, doesn't that equate to just more nitrogen demand that's needed?
Absolutely. Not just nitrogen, phosphate, potash, everything across the board. Because if you're going to plant that acre, what's every farmer's or most farmers' goal? Maximize yield. You cannot maximize yield if you leave one nutrient deficient in the soil. So we always look at it from a very individual, phosphate versus grain and potash versus grain. A lot of farmers are looking at it as a whole package and saying, I can't leave one deficient because I have to maximize the yield and make the payments.
So potash. I mean, we don't use as much potash here in Nebraska, but around the nation, potash is such a very crucial part of what we see in the crops. What is your takeaway right now? As I was reading through kind of some of your bullet points, you were talking about the workings of the U.S., but will U.S. farmers bear the brunt if things continue to grow with tensions with Canada?
I think short term that they will. I believe that for the springtime, simply because, again, we're almost February 1. Our Midwest application season will start here March 1. And by the time we hit April 1st, what does the farmer psyche do? It shifts from pre-plant application to let's get that seed in the ground. Let's get this stuff planted. It's widespread. So we are down to about 60 days left to get this stuff on the field, which means we can't shift our supplies from other places around the world. So if the Canadian manufacturers say, yeah, it's 25% tariff, we're going to just raise our price and pass that along to you, we're in a situation it's very hard to push back because from a negotiation standpoint, we don't have a lot of cards in our deck. So short term, now through spring, we think that the U.S. will probably bear a lot of the brunt. Again, now you get to the summertime, we can start to buy a product from Russia, Israel, other places around the world. We can now shift that conversation, that negotiation back to the Canadian manufacturers and start to split that a little bit more. But yeah, short term, we're simply in a bad position.
So let's say I'm that farmer sitting across the table from you having this discussion about fertilizer and what we're going to need come spring. What's the one takeaway you want them to think about with February just around the corner? And again, like you just mentioned, they're thinking they got plenty of time till spring field work, but we really don't.
We don't. And the one good thing we have going for us on potash is that when you look at the price of potash and you look at it versus the price of corn, if we are willing to sell that new crop, that December 25 corn price against our potash purchases, it is some of the best value, best input-output value that we have seen for potash going back as far as our data has. Corn prices, well, they're not as superb as they have been in recent years. They're still relatively good, sitting in the 460s in Chicago. Potash numbers we're looking at, very, very attractive.
So that again from our farm broadcaster, Susan Littlefield, speaking with Josh Linville of StoneX. So again, another perspective on tariffs and what we'll see here now. I was going to say in the future, but it's now.
Yes. And this is a very fluid discussion for all of us. So you never know, in the next couple of days, we may have new material or we may be like, well, remember what we said the other day?
Never mind.
Never mind.
Right. We will continue to keep an eye and watch and see how this goes. For now, though, that is all the time that we have. Thank you for tuning in. This has been the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. Have a great morning.
Thank you.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.